You're standing at the edge of the Nile River 3,000 years ago. The sun beats down on golden sand that stretches in every direction. Around you, massive stone structures rise from the desert floor, built by hands that moved millions of limestone blocks without modern machines. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization that lasted longer than any empire since. For over 3,000 years, pharaohs ruled from this river valley, building monuments that still stand today. Let's step back in time and walk through the world of pyramids, temples, and kings who believed they would live forever. The Nile River shaped everything in ancient Egypt. Every year, the river flooded, covering the land with dark, rich soil that made crops grow. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been nothing but desert. Villages and cities lined the riverbanks. Farmers planted wheat and barley. Fishermen cast nets into the water. The river was also the main highway, with boats carrying people, food, and building materials up and down its length. Beyond the green river valley, the desert stretched endlessly, protecting Egypt from invaders and giving the civilization room to grow strong. You arrive at Memphis on foot, walking along the river's edge where the Nile splits into many smaller branches. The city spreads out before you, larger than any settlement you have seen so far. Mud brick buildings line the waterfront, their flat roofs creating an uneven skyline against the bright blue sky. The air smells different here. Smoke from cooking fires mixes with the scent of fish drying in the sun. Voices carry across the water as boats arrive and depart from the harbor. Memphis sits at the point where Upper and Lower Egypt meet. This location makes it the natural center of the kingdom. Everything that moves up or down the Nile passes through here. You can see why the first pharaohs chose this spot to build their capital. The river provides water, transportation, and protection all at once. Beyond the city, the desert begins abruptly, creating a clear line between the Green River Valley and the endless sand. The harbor is busy with activity. Wooden boats of different sizes crowd the waterfront. Some are small fishing vessels made from bundles of papyrus reeds tied together. Others are large cargo ships built from imported cedar wood, their hulls sitting low in the water from heavy loads. Workers move between the boats, carrying sacks of grain on their shoulders. The grain comes from farms upstream and will be stored in the royal granaries. You watch as one boat docks and men begin unloading large clay jars sealed with mud plugs. Wine and oil from the Delta region brought south to feed the city. The palace complex dominates the center of Memphis. White limestone walls surround it, so bright in the sunlight that you have to squint when looking directly at them. These walls gave the city one of its names. The Egyptians call this place the White Walls. The limestone comes from quarries across the river, cut into blocks and fitted together with remarkable precision. Guards stand at the main gate holding long spears. They wear simple linen kilts and leather sandals. Their heads are shaved clean, a practical choice in this heat. You cannot enter the palace itself, but you can see the tops of buildings rising above the outer walls. Columns painted in bright colors support roof structures. Red, blue, yellow, and green patterns cover every surface. The Egyptians do not leave stone bare. They paint everything. Flags flutter from tall poles in the courtyards. Even from outside, you can hear the sounds of the palace. voices calling out instructions, the clatter of tools, footsteps on stone pavement. The Temple of Ptah sits near the palace, separated by a wide processional avenue. This temple serves as the religious heart of Memphis. Ptah is the god of craftsmen, builders, and creators. The people here believe he spoke the world into existence. His temple reflects his importance. Massive pylons mark the entrance, their sloped walls covered in carved scenes, showing the pharaoh making offerings to the god. You walk through the gateway into an open courtyard. Columns line both sides, each one carved from a single piece of stone and painted to look like bundled papyrus plants. Priests move through the courtyard, dressed in white linen so clean it almost glows. Their heads and bodies are shaved completely. Purity matters greatly to them. They wash multiple times each day and avoid certain foods. Their main duty is caring for the statue of Ptah, which sits in a shrine deep inside the temple. Most people never see this statue. Only the high priests enter that inner sanctuary. 3 times each day they open the shrine, wash the statue, dress it in fresh linen, and present it with food and drink. To them, the god actually lives inside the statue and needs these things. The marketplace spreads out in the streets surrounding the temple district. Vendors sit in the shade of reed awnings, their goods displayed on woven mats. You see piles of onions, garlic, and cucumbers. Dried fish hang from wooden frames. Clay pots of different sizes stack in neat rows. A woman grinds grain between 2 stones, the repetitive scraping sound mixing with the voices of people bargaining. No coins change hands. The Egyptians do not use money. Instead, they trade one thing for another, deciding the value through negotiation. Craftsmen work in open workshops near the marketplace. A potter shapes clay on a spinning wheel, his hands moving with practiced ease. The wheel turns as his assistant pushes it with a stick. Nearby, a metal worker heats copper in a small furnace, using a blowpipe to make the fire hotter. The copper will become tools, weapons, or jewelry, depending on what is ordered. Another workshop produces furniture. Men saw and plane wood, creating chairs, beds, and storage chests. The smell of fresh-cut wood fills the air around them. You follow a road south from the city center, walking for about an hour, until you reach Saqqara. This necropolis serves as the burial ground for Memphis. The dead are placed on the desert's edge, away from the living, but still connected to the city. Tombs of different sizes dot the landscape. Some are simple mud brick structures, others are elaborate stone buildings. All of them face east, toward the rising sun. The step pyramid rises above everything else at Saqqara. This is the tomb of King Djoser, built more than a century before the Great Pyramids at Giza. It stands as the first large stone building ever constructed. 6 massive steps climb toward the sky, each level smaller than the one below. The structure reaches higher than anything around it. From a distance, it looks like a giant stairway. Walking closer, you notice the pyramid sits inside a large rectangular enclosure. A wall of white limestone surrounds the entire complex, with only one real entrance. The wall has false doors carved into it at regular intervals. These doors go nowhere. They exist for the king's spirit to use in the afterlife. Everything here serves a purpose beyond what you can see. This is not just a tomb. It is a complete palace for the dead king, built in stone to last forever. Inside the enclosure, stone buildings line the edges. These structures look like the temporary shrines used during religious festivals, but they are solid stone, not wood and reed mats. They cannot be entered. They have no interior rooms. They are copies, models, representations of real buildings frozen in stone. The king's spirit will use them during eternal celebrations. The pyramid itself contains a network of passages and chambers cut deep into the rock below. The burial chamber sits at the bottom of a deep shaft. Stone blocks seal the entrance, though tomb robbers broke through long ago. The walls of some underground rooms are covered in blue tiles, arranged to look like reed matting. The tiles gleam in the dim light from the entrance shaft. Stars are carved into the ceiling of one chamber, turning the stone into the night sky. You climb the sandy slope to get a better view of the complex. From this height, you can see Memphis in the distance, its white walls and painted temples visible across the green fields. The Nile flows beyond, a silver ribbon cutting through the land. Behind you, the desert stretches away to the western horizon. The contrast is absolute. Green life on one side, golden death on the other. Smaller pyramids surround the step pyramid. These belong to Djoser's family members and later kings who wanted to be buried near this sacred site. None match the size or presence of the first pyramid. Between the pyramids, you see the entrances to underground tombs cut into the bedrock. These belong to nobles and officials who served the king. Their tombs are smaller, but still decorated with carved scenes and painted walls. A causeway leads from the pyramid complex down toward the valley where Memphis sits. This paved road once allowed funeral processions to bring the king's body from the embalming place to the pyramid. Now it is partially buried in sand. Sections of limestone pavement emerging from the drifts. You walk along it, heading back toward the river valley. Near the edge of the cultivation, you find workshops built specifically for creating royal tomb goods. These buildings are simple mud brick structures, functional rather than beautiful. Inside, artisans create the objects that will accompany the king into the afterlife. You watch as a sculptor carves a limestone statue, working with copper chisels and wooden mallets. The statue shows a seated figure, hands resting on its knees. Each detail must be exact. The statue will serve as a backup body for the king's spirit if the mummy is damaged. In another workshop, painters prepare pigments. They grind colored minerals on stone pallets, mixing them with water and gum to create paint. Red ochre from the desert, yellow from desert sand, blue from ground lapis lazuli, imported from distant lands, black from charcoal, white from chalk. These colors will decorate tomb walls, bringing the painted scenes to life. The sun begins to drop toward the western horizon. The light changes, becoming softer and warmer. Long shadows stretch across the sand. Workers head back toward Memphis, their day finished. You remain a while longer, looking at the step pyramid as it turns golden in the fading light. This place represents the beginning of something extraordinary. An idea that became real through stone and human effort. The idea that a king could build a permanent home for eternity. Something so massive and well-made that it would never fade away. Memphis showed you the living heart of ancient Egypt, the palace where pharaohs ruled, the temple where gods received offerings, the markets where people traded goods, the harbor where boats brought supplies from across the kingdom, and just beyond the city, the necropolis where kings built their eternal homes. Everything connects. The living support the dead. The dead protect the living. The Nile feeds both. The desert preserves everything. You leave Memphis behind and travel south along the Nile, following the river upstream toward the villages that line its banks. The landscape opens up into fields of green crops stretching in both directions. This is where most Egyptians live, not in the grand cities, but in small farming communities clustered near the water. The villages appear every few kilometers, each one looking much like the others. Mud brick houses group together, their walls the same brown color as the earth beneath your feet. The houses are simple rectangular buildings with flat roofs and small windows. The mud brick keeps the interior cool during the hottest part of the day. Families build these homes themselves, mixing Nile mud with straw and forming it into bricks that dry hard in the sun. The roofs are made from palm logs covered with reeds and more mud. During the hot season, people sleep on these roofs where the air moves more freely. You can see sleeping mats rolled up and stacked in corners, waiting for nightfall. The village spreads along the riverbank in an unplanned pattern. Narrow paths wind between the houses. Children run through these passages, their voices carrying across the settlement. Dogs wander freely, searching for scraps. Goats are tied near some doorways, pulling at whatever vegetation they can reach. The smell of animal dung mixes with wood smoke and the earthy scent of the river. Beyond the village, the fields begin. Farmers are already at work, even though the sun has barely cleared the eastern horizon. The planting season has arrived, following the flood that left fresh soil across the land. Men guide wooden plows pulled by oxen, cutting straight furrows through the dark earth. The oxen move slowly, their heads lowered against the weight of the plow. Behind them, women and children walk the furrows, dropping seeds into the ground and covering them with their feet. You walk along the edge of a field, watching the work proceed. No one speaks much. The labor requires steady movement, not conversation. The plow makes a scraping sound as it turns the soil. The oxen snort and grunt. Birds follow behind the workers, picking insects from the freshly turned earth. Everything moves at the same measured pace, determined by the animals and the rhythm of the season. The irrigation system becomes clear as you walk farther from the river. Small canals branch off from the main channel, carrying water into the fields. Farmers control the flow using simple mud dams that can be opened or closed. When a field needs water, they break the dam and let the canal fill. When enough water has entered, they rebuild the dam with baskets of mud. The system is ancient and effective. Every farmer knows how to maintain it because their survival depends on getting the timing right. Near one canal, men operate a shaduf to lift water from a lower channel to a higher field. The device is simple but clever. A long pole balanced on a vertical post acts as a lever. A bucket hangs from one end. A heavy counterweight sits on the other. The farmer pulls down the bucket end, dips it in the canal, then releases it. The counterweight pulls the full bucket up. He swings the pole and dumps the water into the higher channel. Then he repeats the motion over and over, hour after hour. The shaduf creaks with each swing. Water splashes into the canal. The farmer's movements become automatic, his body finding the rhythm that requires the least effort. Women gather near the river's edge where the bank slopes gently into the water. They carry large clay jars on their heads or balanced on their hips. These jars will be filled with water and carried back to the village. You watch as one woman wades into the shallows, letting her jar sink until it fills. She lifts it smoothly, the water streaming from its sides, and places it on her head. Her posture straightens under the weight. She walks back up the bank without using her hands to steady the jar, her neck and spine doing all the work. Other women kneel by the water, washing clothes by beating them against flat stones. They work in groups, talking as they scrub and rinse. Linen cloth darkens when wet, then gradually lightens as they wring it out. They spread the clean cloth on bushes and rocks to dry in the sun. By midday, the fabric will be stiff and white again, ready to be folded and taken home. Children play nearby, but stay away from the deeper water. Everyone knows about crocodiles. The animals rest on muddy banks downstream, their bodies still except for the occasional swish of a tail. The Egyptians respect these creatures, but do not fear them unnecessarily. They know where crocodiles gather and which areas are safer. Still, parents watch their children carefully near the water. You walk back toward the village as the sun climbs higher. The temperature rises quickly. People begin to retreat into the shade. Work will slow during the hottest hours, then resume in the late afternoon. Inside the village, you see women grinding grain outside their homes. They kneel before large stone slabs tilted at an angle. Using smaller stones held in both hands, they push grain back and forth across the surface. The grinding makes a rough scraping sound that never quite stops. This work continues every day because bread forms the center of every meal. In one courtyard, a woman tends a small oven made from dried mud. The oven is dome-shaped with an opening at the front. A fire burns inside, heating the walls. She shapes dough into flat rounds and sticks them against the hot interior surface. The bread bakes quickly, the smell filling the courtyard. When ready, she pulls the rounds out with her bare hands, moving fast enough that the heat does not burn her. The bread joins a stack on a reed mat, enough to feed her family for the day. Near the center of the village stands a shrine dedicated to the local god. This is not a grand temple like the one in Memphis. It is a simple structure, barely larger than a house. The walls are mud brick like everything else. Inside, a small statue sits on a raised platform. Villagers leave offerings when they pass. A few onions, some grain, a jar of beer. These gifts are meant to keep the god satisfied and ensure the flood comes on time next year. A priest maintains the shrine. He is not a high-ranking temple official, but a local man who performs the basic rituals. Each morning, he enters the shrine and presents the god with food and drink. He burns incense and recites prayers. The villagers trust him to keep the god's favor. In return, they provide him with a share of their harvest. The arrangement works because everyone understands their role. Beyond the village, workers are building a tomb for a local official who serves the pharaoh. The tomb is cut directly into the low desert cliff that marks the edge of the valley. Men with copper chisels chip away at the limestone, creating a doorway that leads into a chamber. The work is slow and dusty. Rock chips pile up at the entrance. The workers take turns inside the chamber because the space is cramped and the air grows stale. You climb up to watch the work. Inside the chamber, two men swing mallets against chisels, each blow removing small pieces of stone. They are cutting scenes into the walls. These scenes will show the official's life and ensure his spirit has everything needed in the afterlife. One section already shows workers in fields harvesting grain. Another shows boats on the river carrying goods. The carvers work from sketches drawn in red paint on the wall. They follow these guidelines exactly, creating images that look almost identical to those in royal tombs, just smaller and simpler. Nearby, painters prepare to add color to finished carvings. They mix their pigments in pottery bowls, testing colors on scraps of limestone. The paint must be just right. Too thick and it clumps, too thin and it runs. They use brushes made from reeds that have been chewed until the fibers separate. The brushes are crude but effective. One painter begins filling in a carved figure, carefully staying within the lines. Red-brown for skin, black for hair, white for linen cloth. The tomb owner arrives to inspect the progress. He is middle-aged, dressed in a fine linen kilt that marks his status. A wig covers his shaved head. He walks through the chamber, examining each carved scene. The workers pause their labor, waiting for his reaction. He nods his approval and speaks briefly with the head craftsman about the remaining work. Then he leaves. The workers immediately return to their tasks. The sound of mallet on chisel echoes from the chamber. You descend from the cliff and walk along the desert edge. The boundary between green and gold is absolutely sharp. On one side, irrigated fields support barley and wheat. On the other, sand and rock stretch to the horizon. Nothing grows in the desert except in rare spots where underground water reaches the surface. The Egyptians call the fertile land the Black Land because of its dark soil. They call the desert the Red Land because of its color and its emptiness. A team of oxen pulls a sledge loaded with stone blocks along the desert's edge. The blocks are destined for a temple construction site farther south. Workers have placed wooden rollers under the sledge to reduce friction. Even so, the oxen strain against the weight. Men walk alongside, urging the animals forward. Others pour water on the sand in front of the sledge, making it more compact and easier to slide across. The sledge moves slowly but steadily, covering maybe a kilometer in an hour. You follow a different path back toward the river, passing through more fields. Farmers are working with hand tools now, clearing weeds from around young plants. This work requires care and attention. Each plant must be checked. Each weed must be pulled without damaging the crop. The farmers move down the rows systematically, their backs bent, hands moving constantly. In one field, workers are building a small storage building for the harvest. They form mud bricks on the spot, using wooden molds to shape the mixture of mud and straw. Once formed, the bricks are laid in the sun to dry. Thousands of bricks will be needed before the building is complete. The work will continue for weeks. This storage building will hold grain that belongs to the temple. A portion of every harvest goes to the gods. Another portion goes to the pharaoh. What remains feeds the farmers and their families. Near sunset, the village comes alive again as the heat fades. People emerge from their houses. The evening meal is prepared. Families gather in courtyards and on rooftops. You smell the bread baking, the onions cooking, the beer fermenting in large jars. Voices mix with laughter. Children play games in the streets. The day's work is done, and the evening offers a brief time for rest. A group of men sit in a circle, passing a beer jar between them. They drink through reed straws to filter out the sediment. The beer is thick and nutritious, made from barley bread that has been allowed to ferment. It is safer to drink than river water and provides calories that help men endure the physical labor of farming. The conversation is relaxed. They discuss the flood predictions for next year. They talk about which fields produce the best yields. They mention a wedding that will happen next month. As darkness settles, the village grows quiet. Oil lamps flicker in doorways. Most families cannot afford much oil, so the lamps are small and burn only briefly. Soon, the only light comes from stars that fill the sky, in numbers impossible to count. The Milky Way stretches across the darkness like a river of light. The Egyptians see this as the heavenly version of the Nile, a path for the gods and the blessed dead. You find a place to rest on a rooftop, joining a family who has made space for you. The mud brick still radiates the day's heat. A slight breeze comes off the river, carrying cooler air. Below, the village has gone completely silent except for the occasional bark of a dog. This is how life continues for most Egyptians, generation after generation, planting and harvesting, building and repairing, worshiping and working. The rhythm set by the river and the seasons, unchanged since the first farmers settled here thousands of years ago. You wake before dawn and walk toward the river as the sky begins to lighten. The Nile stretches wide here, its surface smooth and dark. No wind disturbs the water. The air feels cool against your skin, a brief relief before the sun brings heat. You stand at the edge where mud meets water, watching the current move slowly northward. This river is the reason Egypt exists at all. The Nile flows from south to north, carrying water from distant mountains that most Egyptians will never see. The river travels through hundreds of kilometers of desert, a green line cutting through golden emptiness. Without it, this entire valley would be sand and rock. Nothing would grow. No one could live here. The river makes everything possible. As the sun rises, light spreads across the water. You see movement beneath the surface. Fish swim in schools, their bodies creating ripples. These fish provide food for villages all along the river. Fishermen are already at work, standing in small boats made from bundles of papyrus reeds lashed together. The boats sit low in the water, barely rising above the surface. The fishermen cast nets with practiced motions, letting the weighted edges sink while holding the center. They wait a moment, then pull the nets back in. Sometimes fish thrash in the mesh. Sometimes the nets come up empty. Further along the bank, papyrus plants grow thick in the shallows. The tall green stalks rise straight from the water, their feathery tops swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Papyrus grows only where the current is slow and the water stays relatively still. The Egyptians use every part of this plant. The stalks become boat material, sandals, baskets, and mats. The pith inside the stalks is cut into thin strips, laid in crossing layers, and pressed into sheets for writing. The roots are sometimes eaten when food runs short. A hippo surfaces in deeper water, its massive head breaking through with barely a splash. Only its eyes, ears, and nostrils show above the waterline. The animal watches you without moving. Hippos spend most of the day in the water to stay cool, then come onto land at night to graze. Despite their size, they move quietly through the shallows. The Egyptians respect hippos and generally avoid them. A full-grown hippo can overturn a boat without effort and will attack if it feels threatened. You notice a crocodile resting on a muddy bank downstream. The animal is motionless, its body stretched out in the sun. Only its eyes show that it is alive, following movements along the shore. Crocodiles are common in the Nile, ranging from small ones barely longer than your arm to massive adults that can take down large prey. The Egyptians see crocodiles as dangerous, but also as sacred animals connected to certain gods. Some temples keep crocodiles in pools, feeding them and caring for them as holy creatures. Birds gather along the shoreline. Ibises wade through the shallows, their long curved beaks probing the mud for food. Their white feathers stand out against the brown water and green plants. Herons stand perfectly still on one leg, waiting for fish to swim close enough to strike. When a fish appears, the heron's head darts forward faster than you can follow. Sometimes it comes up with prey. Sometimes it misses and returns to waiting. Ducks paddle in quieter sections of the river, diving beneath the surface to feed on plants and small creatures. Flocks of them take flight when disturbed, their wings beating hard to lift their bodies from the water. The sound carries across the river. Egyptian hunters catch these birds using throw sticks, curved pieces of wood that spin through the air and stun the birds in flight. The hunting happens from small boats in the papyrus marshes where ducks gather in large numbers. You walk upstream, following the river as it curves through the valley. The flood season ended months ago, but you can still see the high water marks on the banks. Dark lines show how far the water rose, covering the fields and depositing fresh soil. The flood comes every year at the same time, driven by rains in the distant highlands. The Egyptians watch for it carefully because their entire year depends on this event. When the flood arrives, the river swells beyond its normal banks. Water spreads across the valley floor, turning the land into a shallow lake. Only the villages remain above water, built on slightly higher ground for exactly this reason. The flood lasts for months. During this time, farming stops. Workers are available for other projects, which is when the pharaoh organizes large construction efforts. When the water finally recedes, it leaves behind a layer of rich black silt that makes the soil incredibly fertile. After the flood comes the planting season. Farmers break up the soil and plant their seeds. The crops grow quickly in the good earth, fed by water from the irrigation canals. Then comes harvest, when the grain is cut and collected before the next flood arrives. This cycle repeats without fail. 3 seasons that divide the year: flood, planting, harvest. Everything else fits around this pattern. You climb away from the river, heading toward the desert that rises on both sides of the valley. The transition is sudden. One step you are on green grass. The next step lands on sand. The temperature increases immediately. The desert absorbs heat and holds it. Even early in the morning, the sand feels warm beneath your feet. The desert stretches in every direction, broken only by rocky outcrops and low hills. Sand dunes rise and fall in waves. The wind shapes these dunes constantly, moving sand grain by grain. Nothing grows here except in rare spots where underground water reaches the surface. Those places, called oases, support palm trees and small settlements, but most of the desert is completely empty. You walk across the sand, feeling it shift under your weight. The surface is loose and makes walking difficult. Each step requires extra effort. The sun climbs higher and the heat becomes intense. There is no shade anywhere. No clouds block the sun. The sky is a hard blue that stretches from horizon to horizon. In the distance, you spot movement. A small group of animals crosses the desert, their shapes wavering in the heat. As they come closer, you recognize gazelles. They move in a loose group, stopping occasionally to scan for danger. These animals survive in the desert by knowing where to find the scattered plants that grow after rare rains. They can go long periods without drinking, getting moisture from the vegetation they eat. A jackal appears on a ridge, its lean body silhouetted against the sky. The animal watches you for a moment, then disappears behind the rocks. Jackals are scavengers, feeding on whatever they can find. They come near villages at night, searching for scraps and hunting small prey. The Egyptians associate jackals with the desert and with death because these animals are often seen near burial grounds. You notice tracks in the sand. Some you recognize. Bird prints where a desert lark walked in search of seeds. The dragging line of a snake that passed during the night. Smaller marks from beetles and lizards. Other tracks are less clear, half erased by wind or too old to identify. The desert keeps few records. Wind and sand erase everything eventually. Rock formations rise from the sand in places. These outcrops are limestone and sandstone, layers of ancient seabed pushed up and exposed by geological forces. The Egyptians quarry these rocks for building material. You can see where blocks have been cut from the cliff faces, leaving rectangular scars in the stone. Workers extract the blocks using copper tools and wooden wedges. They drive the wedges into cracks, then pour water on the wood. As the wood swells, it splits the rock along natural fault lines. The cliffs show different colored layers. Pale yellow limestone alternates with darker bands of harder stone. Each layer represents a different period of deposition, millions of years compressed into visible stripes. The Egyptians do not think about the desert in terms of deep time. To them, the desert has always been here, unchanging and eternal. You find a wadi, a dry riverbed cutting through the desert. During rare rainstorms, water rushes through these channels with tremendous force, but most of the time they are completely dry. Smooth rocks line the bottom, polished by past floods. A few tough plants grow in protected spots where water might linger underground. These plants have deep roots and waxy leaves that prevent water loss. Walking along the wadi, you spot a desert fox den dug into the sandy bank. The entrance is small and partly hidden by rocks. Desert foxes are smaller than their cousins in other lands, adapted to survive on limited food and water. They hunt at night when temperatures drop, feeding on rodents, insects, and birds. During the day, they shelter in their dens, waiting out the heat. Higher in the rocky areas, you see a snake coiled in the shade of a boulder. The snake is motionless, conserving energy. Several species of snakes live in the Egyptian desert. Some are venomous and dangerous. Others are harmless. The Egyptians know which are which and treat all snakes with caution. Cobras especially command respect and appear in royal symbols as protectors of the pharaoh. The heat becomes overwhelming by midday. You retreat to a shaded spot where a rock overhang provides relief from direct sun. The temperature in the shade is still hot but bearable. You rest here watching heat waves rise from the sand. The desert seems empty, but it is full of life adapted to extremes. Animals and plants that can survive here cannot live anywhere else. They need the heat and dryness, just as river creatures need water. As afternoon arrives, you make your way back toward the Nile Valley. The descent brings you back into Greenland, where the temperature drops noticeably. The contrast between desert and river valley is extreme. Two completely different worlds existing side by side, separated by a line you can step across. Near the river, date palms grow in groves. These trees provide fruit, shade, and building materials. The dates ripen in clusters high in the trees. Workers climb up to harvest them, cutting entire bunches that fall to the ground. The dates are sweet and keep well when dried. They provide food during times when fresh crops are not available. Acacia trees dot the landscape near the desert edge. These thorny trees survive with minimal water, their deep roots reaching underground sources. The Egyptians value acacia wood for its hardness and use it in furniture and tools. The trees also produce gum that has various uses in medicine and manufacturing. You return to the river's edge as the sun begins to set. The water reflects the changing sky. Orange and pink light spreads across the surface. Birds settle for the night, their calls growing quieter. The hippo you saw earlier has disappeared, probably moving to land to feed. Crocodiles slide into deeper water, becoming invisible. Across the river, the desert turns gold in the fading light. The sand seems to glow. Shadows lengthen from every rock and dune. For a brief moment, the harsh landscape looks almost beautiful. Then the sun drops below the horizon and the desert fades to gray, then black. The Nile continues its steady flow north, moving through the darkness just as it moved through the light. The river never stops. It has flowed this way for thousands of years and will continue long after you are gone. This constancy gives Egypt its strength. The river can be counted on. It will flood when expected. It will recede on schedule. The crops will grow. Life will continue. The desert surrounds everything, but cannot enter where the water flows. As long as the Nile exists, Egypt exists. You leave the main river valley and follow a smaller path that leads west into the desert hills. The path is well worn, marked by footprints and the tracks of donkeys carrying supplies. Other people have traveled this route many times before. After walking for an hour, you see a cluster of stone houses built against a low cliff face. This is Deir el-Medina, the village where the tomb workers live. The village sits in a narrow valley between steep hills. The location was chosen carefully. It is close enough to the royal burial grounds for workers to reach them easily, but far enough from the main settlements to keep the tomb locations secret. The workers who live here spend their lives cutting and decorating the underground chambers where pharaohs and nobles will be buried. They know things that must not spread to the general population. The houses are built from stone rather than mud brick. Stone lasts longer in this dry climate, and the workers have plenty of it nearby. Each house is a simple rectangle with thick walls and a flat roof. The buildings stand close together, separated by narrow alleys barely wide enough for two people to pass. The village layout follows the natural contours of the valley, houses clustering wherever the ground is relatively level. You walk between the buildings, observing the daily activities. Women sit in doorways, working on various tasks. Some grind grain on stone slabs. Others spin flax into thread using simple wooden spindles. Children play in the alleys, their games creating noise that echoes off the stone walls. The village feels cramped compared to the open farming settlements near the Nile, but the residents seem comfortable with the tight quarters. At the center of the village, you find a small shrine built against the hillside. The shrine is dedicated to several gods that the workers pray to for protection and success in their dangerous work. The interior is dark and cool. Painted scenes cover the walls, showing gods receiving offerings and granting favors. Local workers created these paintings using the same skills they apply in the royal tombs. The quality is high, even though this is just a village shrine. Outside the shrine, you notice several large pottery jars placed in the shade. These jars contain water brought from the Nile by donkey. Water must be carried to the village because there is no natural source nearby. The jars are covered with wet cloth to keep the water cool through evaporation. Villagers come throughout the day to fill smaller vessels for their households. You climb the path that leads from the village to the work sites. The path switches back and forth up the steep hillside, making the ascent easier. Small walls line sections of the path where the drop is particularly sharp. At the top, the path levels out and continues along the ridge. From here you can see the Valley of the Kings spreading below, a barren landscape of rocky hills and deep wadis. The tomb entrances are cut into the cliff faces, positioned to be hidden from casual view. Each entrance is a rectangular opening leading into darkness. Guards stand near some of the active work sites, making sure no unauthorized people approach. The locations of royal tombs are closely guarded secrets. Even the workers are separated into different crews so that no single person knows too much about the overall layout. You are allowed to observe one work site where a tomb is being prepared for a high official. The entrance leads to a descending corridor cut straight into the bedrock. The corridor is just wide enough for workers to move through while carrying tools and rubble. Oil lamps provide light, their flames creating dancing shadows on the walls. The air inside is stale and dusty. Workers move in and out of the tomb, some carrying baskets of broken rock on their shoulders. The debris is dumped outside and will eventually be used to hide the tomb entrance after the burial is complete. Inside the corridor, you hear the sound of hammers striking chisels. The rhythm is steady and continuous. Workers are expanding the burial chamber at the end of the passage. The burial chamber is large enough for several people to work at once. The ceiling is high, requiring workers to stand on wooden platforms to reach the upper walls. The floor is covered in rock chips and dust. The air tastes gritty. Men with copper chisels cut scenes into the limestone walls, following sketches drawn in red paint. The sketches show the standard images found in most tombs: the deceased receiving offerings, gods granting protection, scenes of daily life that the spirit will enjoy in the afterlife. One worker focuses on carving a procession of offering bearers. The figures are shown in profile, walking in a line toward an altar. Each figure carries something: bread, meat, jars of beer, bundles of lotus flowers. The carver works slowly and carefully, using different sized chisels for different parts of the image. Large chisels remove excess stone. Small chisels define details like fingers and facial features. The limestone is soft enough to carve but hard enough to hold fine detail. In another section of the chamber, painters are adding color to finished carvings. They work from small pottery bowls containing different pigments mixed with water. The painters use thin brushes made from reeds to fill in the carved areas. They apply the paint in flat colors without shading or blending: red-brown for human skin, yellow for women's skin, which is painted lighter than men's, black for hair and outlines, white for clothing, blue and green for decorative elements. One painter works on a scene showing the tomb owner sitting before a table loaded with food. The owner's skin is painted the correct red-brown tone. His wig is solid black. His white linen kilt stands out against the darker background. The painter moves methodically, completing one section before moving to the next. The paint dries quickly in the dry air, allowing the work to proceed without long waiting periods. You watch the painters mix their colors. Red comes from iron oxide found in desert rocks. Yellow comes from a different type of ochre. Black is made from charcoal or soot. White comes from chalk or gypsum. Blue is the most expensive color because it requires grinding imported minerals. Green is made by mixing blue and yellow. The painters guard their pigments carefully because replacing them takes time and effort. Outside the tomb, other workers are preparing the equipment that will be used during the burial. You see a wooden sled designed to carry the stone sarcophagus. The sled has thick runners that will slide over logs placed on the ground. Moving the heavy sarcophagus from the workshop to the tomb requires many men and careful coordination. The path must be cleared and smoothed. Logs must be continually moved from the back of the sled to the front as it advances. Near the worksite, you find the remains of worker shelters. These are simple stone huts where the men sleep during their 8-day work period. The workers follow a schedule of 8 days on, 2 days off. During their work period, they stay near the tombs to maximize productive time. During their days off, they return to the village to be with their families. The shelters are basic structures with just enough room to sleep and store personal items. You notice graffiti scratched into rocks near the shelters. Workers have written their names and short messages. Some complain about the heat. Others record the number of days until their next break. A few sketch quick drawings of animals or people. These informal marks give a glimpse into the workers' thoughts and feelings. Despite the important nature of their work, they still experience boredom and discomfort like anyone doing hard physical labor. Walking further into the hills, you discover smaller tomb sites belonging to the workers themselves. These tombs are much simpler than the royal ones, but they follow the same basic design. A shaft cut into the rock leads down to a small burial chamber. The chambers are barely large enough for a body and a few grave goods. Some of the worker tombs have decorated walls painted by the workers or their colleagues as a final service. One worker tomb is open, and you climb down to look inside. The chamber is tiny, perhaps 2 meters square. The walls are covered in painted scenes similar to those in larger tombs. Stone quarries dot the hillsides where workers extract the limestone and sandstone used in construction. The quarries are simply places where good quality stone comes close to the surface. Workers cut blocks directly from the cliff face, creating stepped excavations that grow deeper over time. Abandoned blocks lie scattered around, rejected because of flaws or cracks discovered during extraction. Tool marks cover the quarry walls. You can see where copper chisels bit into the stone, leaving parallel grooves. Holes drilled into the rock show where wooden wedges were inserted. The wedges would be soaked with water, causing them to expand and split the stone along predetermined lines. This technique allows workers to extract large blocks without shattering them. A path leads to another small settlement built specifically for workers creating tomb goods. This workshop area is separate from the main village. Here, craftsmen produce the items that will be placed in tombs. Furniture, statues, jewelry, pottery, and countless other objects are made according to specifications provided by the tomb owners or their families. You see a workshop where wooden furniture is being constructed. Workers saw and plane imported cedar wood, shaping it into beds, chairs, and boxes. The wood is expensive and must be used carefully. Every piece is measured and fitted precisely. Some furniture pieces are decorated with inlays of ivory, gold, or colored stones. These decorative elements are applied last, after the basic structure is complete. In another workshop, sculptors create stone statues. These statues will serve as backup bodies for the deceased if the mummy is damaged. The sculptors work from standardized proportions, blocking out the basic form before refining the details. A statue begins as a rectangular block of stone. The sculptor removes material gradually, revealing the figure within. The process takes weeks or months, depending on the statue's size. Pottery workshops produce the jars and containers needed to store food and liquids in the tomb. Potters shape clay on simple wheels, creating standardized forms that have been used for generations. The vessels are dried in the sun, then fired in kilns built into the hillside. Smoke rises from the kilns as they operate, marking the workshop area from a distance. As the sun begins to set, workers start returning to the village. They walk down the steep paths in groups, talking about the day's progress. Their clothes are covered in dust, and their hands are rough from handling stone and tools. They look tired, but not exhausted. This is simply their daily work, repeated year after year throughout their lives. You walk back to the village with them. The stone houses take on a warm glow in the evening light. Smoke rises from cooking fires. The smell of food being prepared fills the narrow alleys. Families gather in small courtyards between the buildings. Children run to greet returning fathers. The village transforms from a quiet daytime settlement into a busy evening community. Workers sit together in groups, sharing simple meals and beer. They discuss technical problems encountered during the day. One team had trouble with a particularly hard section of rock. Another discovered a crack that required changing their planned layout. The conversations are practical and focused on the work that defines their lives. You find a spot on a rooftop where you can watch the village settle into night. The sky darkens and stars appear. The desert hills surrounding the village turn black. Lights flicker in windows as families prepare for sleep. The noise gradually fades. This hidden village, built to serve the needs of the dead, quiets down as the living rest and gather strength for tomorrow's labor in the tombs. You leave the worker village before dawn and travel north along the desert plateau. The journey takes several hours, following paths that wind between rocky outcrops and sandy valleys. The sun rises behind you, casting long shadows across the landscape. As you climb higher, the air becomes clearer and the horizon extends farther in every direction. You are heading toward Giza, where the largest structures ever built by ancient people stand against the sky. The pyramids appear gradually as you approach. First, you see only their tops rising above the desert hills. Then, as you crest a ridge, the full scale becomes visible. 3 massive pyramids dominate the plateau, arranged in a diagonal line. Even from this distance, their size is overwhelming. These are not buildings in the normal sense. They are mountains of stone shaped by human hands. The largest pyramid stands at the northern end of the group. This is the Great Pyramid, built for King Khufu. It rises in perfect geometric form, each side a smooth triangle, meeting at a point high above the desert. The pyramid was originally covered in white limestone casing stones that would have made it gleam in the sunlight. Most of those stones are gone now, removed over the centuries for other building projects. What remains is the stepped core structure, layers of yellowish limestone blocks stacked in precise courses. You walk closer, crossing the open plateau toward the pyramid's base. The ground is littered with stone chips and fragments, evidence of the massive construction effort. As you approach, the pyramid grows larger with each step until it fills your entire field of vision. Standing at the base, you have to tilt your head back to see the top. The blocks in the lowest courses are enormous, some taller than a person and weighing as much as several oxen combined. The pyramid sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. The north face points true north, the east face points east. This alignment was achieved without modern instruments, using only observations of stars and the sun. The accuracy is remarkable. The base forms an almost perfect square, with each side measuring the same length within a hand's width. Achieving this precision over such a large area required careful planning and constant checking. You walk around the pyramid's base, trying to comprehend its scale. Each side stretches for over 200 meters. The structure contains millions of stone blocks, each one cut, moved, and placed by human workers. The labor required is almost impossible to imagine. Tens of thousands of people working for decades, all focused on creating a tomb for a single king. Near the pyramid's base, you find the entrance. A passage leads into the interior, descending at a steep angle. The passage is narrow and low, forcing you to bend as you enter. The air inside is cool and still. The walls are smooth limestone, cut with precision. Oil lamps would have provided light during construction, but now the passage is dark except for light filtering in from the entrance. The descending passage leads to an underground chamber cut into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. This chamber was started but never finished. The floor is rough and uneven. Tool marks show where workers began cutting but stopped for unknown reasons. The pyramid has multiple internal passages and chambers, a complex arrangement that likely changed during construction as plans were modified. Another passage, the ascending corridor, climbs upward through the pyramid's core. This passage is also narrow and steep. It leads to a larger space called the Grand Gallery. The gallery is a tall, narrow room with a corbelled ceiling that rises in steps. Walking through the gallery feels like moving through a tall, narrow canyon made of stone. The walls are smooth, and the construction is precise. The Grand Gallery leads to the king's burial chamber, located near the center of the pyramid. The chamber is a rectangular room built entirely from red granite blocks. brought from quarries far to the south. The granite blocks are massive and fitted together with remarkable precision. The chamber ceiling is formed by enormous granite beams spanning the width of the room. Above these beams are several more layers of granite, designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid above. A stone sarcophagus sits in the chamber, carved from a single block of granite. The sarcophagus is empty now, the king's mummy long since removed or destroyed by tomb robbers. The sarcophagus is too large to have been brought through the passages, which means it must have been placed here during construction before the upper parts of the pyramid were completed. You return to the surface through the narrow passages, emerging into bright sunlight. The contrast between the dark interior and the brilliant exterior is striking. Your eyes need time to adjust. Around you, the desert plateau stretches in every direction. The two smaller pyramids stand nearby, built for Khufu's successors. They follow the same basic design, but are smaller in scale. The middle pyramid was built for King Khafra. At its peak, some of the original white casing stones still remain, giving a hint of how all three pyramids once looked. The casing stones are smooth and fit together so tightly that a blade cannot slip between them. When complete and covered in these white stones, the pyramids would have been visible from great distances, gleaming like beacons across the desert. The third pyramid, built for King Menkaure, is the smallest of the three, but still massive by any standard. Near its base stand three smaller pyramids likely built for queens. These pyramids follow the same construction techniques, but on a reduced scale. Even the smallest pyramid at Giza contains thousands of stone blocks and represents years of labor. Between the pyramids, you see the remains of causeways and temples. Each pyramid was part of a larger complex that included a valley temple near the cultivation, a causeway leading up to the plateau, and a mortuary temple at the pyramid's base. These structures are mostly ruined now, but enough remains to show their original layout. The Sphinx sits near the causeway of the second pyramid. This massive statue has the body of a lion and the head of a human, possibly representing King Khafre. The Sphinx is carved from the living bedrock, shaped from a limestone outcrop that was left in place during quarrying operations. The statue faces east, looking toward the rising sun. The Sphinx is enormous. Its body stretches over 70 meters long. The head rises 20 meters above the ground. The statue has been partially buried by sand many times throughout history, then excavated again. Even now, sand accumulates around its base, blown by desert winds. The features of the face have been worn by wind and sand, but the basic form remains clear. You climb onto the Sphinx's back, where the surface is relatively flat. From here, you have a clear view across the plateau. The three pyramids rise in a line, their shapes stark against the blue sky. To the east, the Green Nile Valley is visible in the distance, a strip of vegetation separating the desert on both sides. To the west, the desert extends to the horizon without interruption. Walking across the plateau, you find evidence of the massive workforce that built these monuments. Bakeries and breweries were located here to feed the workers. The remains of these facilities show large-scale production. Bread was baked in quantities sufficient to feed thousands of people daily. Beer was brewed in huge vats. The grain for both came from farms throughout Egypt, collected as taxes, and delivered to the construction site. Worker housing once stood near the construction areas. These were temporary settlements occupied for the duration of the building projects. The workers lived in simple shelters arranged in organized rows. Different crews had separate areas. The organization was military in its precision, with clear chains of command and assigned responsibilities. You find the quarries where much of the pyramid stone was extracted. These quarries are located right on the plateau, convenient to the building sites. Workers cut blocks directly from the bedrock, creating deep trenches and stepped excavations. The quarry faces still show the marks of copper chisels and the holes where wooden wedges were driven to split the stone. Moving stone blocks from the quarries to the pyramids required coordinated effort. Workers used wooden sledges to transport the blocks. The sledges slid over wooden rollers or directly on the ground if the surface was prepared properly. Teams of men pulled the sledges using ropes. Overseers coordinated the pulling to keep the load moving smoothly. Water was poured on the ground ahead of the sledge to reduce friction and make pulling easier. Ramps were built to raise the stones to higher levels as the pyramid grew. The exact design of these ramps is uncertain, but they had to be long and gradual enough for workers to pull the heavy loads. The ramps were made from mud brick and rubble, materials that could be easily assembled and then removed when no longer needed. As the pyramid rose higher, the ramps had to be extended and raised, requiring constant rebuilding. You imagine the plateau during construction. Thousands of workers moving between the quarries and the pyramids, sledges being pulled up ramps, stone blocks being positioned and fitted, overseers calling out instructions, the sound of chisels on stone, the creaking of ropes under strain. The whole plateau would have been a scene of organized activity, more like a military campaign than a construction site. Boat pits are located near the pyramids, long rectangular trenches cut into the bedrock. These pits once held full-sized wooden boats, disassembled and carefully placed underground. The boats were meant for the king's use in the afterlife, allowing his spirit to travel through the heavens with the sun god. One of these boats has been found intact, its cedar wood planks still in remarkable condition after thousands of years underground. As the sun begins to set, the pyramids cast long shadows across the plateau. The light turns golden, then orange, then red. The white limestone peaks catch the last rays while the bases fall into shadow. The desert around the pyramids darkens. The temperature drops quickly, as it always does in the desert after sunset. You find a place to sit facing the pyramids as night arrives. Stars begin to appear, first a few bright ones, then thousands filling the sky. The Milky Way becomes visible, a pale band stretching overhead. The ancient Egyptians saw this as the heavenly Nile, a river of stars where the gods and blessed dead traveled. The pyramids remain visible even in the darkness, their massive forms blocking out the stars behind them. These structures were built to last forever, tombs that would protect the pharaohs for all eternity. The builders succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. The pyramids have stood for over 4,000 years, surviving empires, invasions, earthquakes, and the slow erosion of time. Sitting here in the darkness, you understand what these pyramids represent. They are monuments to human ambition and capability. They show what can be accomplished when a society organizes itself toward a single goal and maintains that focus for generations. They represent belief in the afterlife so strong that people would devote their entire lives to preparing for it. The pyramids also show the power of the pharaohs. Only a king with absolute authority could marshal the resources needed for such projects: the grain to feed workers, the copper for tools, the wood for sledges and ramps, the organization to keep thousands of workers productive. All of this required a strong central government and a stable society. But the pyramids also represent the workers who built them, the quarrymen who cut the blocks, the haulers who dragged them into place, the masons who fitted them together, the artists who decorated the internal chambers. These workers were not slaves, but Egyptian citizens performing labor service for their king and gods. They were fed and housed and organized into efficient crews. Their labor built monuments that still stand as testimony to their skill and dedication. As you prepare to leave the plateau, you take one last look at the pyramids. Their dark shapes rise against the star-filled sky, silent and eternal. The desert wind blows across the plateau, the same wind that has blown here for thousands of years. The sand shifts and moves, but the pyramids remain, the ultimate expression of ancient Egypt's power, beliefs, and capabilities. Tomorrow you will leave this place, but the pyramids will still be here, waiting in the desert as they have waited for millennium after millennium. You wake at dawn on the Giza Plateau and begin your journey back toward the Nile. The pyramids stand behind you as you walk east, their massive forms gradually shrinking with distance until they become simple, triangular shapes on the horizon. The desert gives way to cultivated land. Green fields replace golden sand. The air grows slightly more humid as you approach the river. Walking through the fields, you think about everything you have seen. The capital city of Memphis with its white walls and busy harbor. The farming villages where people live their lives according to the rhythm of the Nile's floods. The river itself flowing endlessly north, bringing life to a land that would otherwise be empty desert. The worker village hidden in the hills, where craftsmen spend their lives creating tombs for others. And finally, the pyramids at Gaza, monuments so large and permanent that they seem more like natural features than human constructions. Each place connects to the others. The farmers grow grain that feeds the workers. The workers build tombs for the kings. The kings organize the society that makes farming possible. The Nile makes everything work by providing water, transportation, and fertile soil. The desert protects Egypt from invaders while providing stone for building. Everything fits together in a system that has functioned for thousands of years. You reach a village near the river and stop to rest. Families are beginning their daily routines. Women carry water jars from the river. Men head toward the fields with their tools. Children play in the dusty streets. Life continues, as it always has, following patterns established by countless generations before. These people do not think about the pyramids or the pharaohs most of the time. They think about their crops, their families, their immediate needs. Yet the pyramids exist because of people exactly like these villagers. The massive monuments were built by farmers who spent part of each year working on royal projects. The grain that fed those workers came from fields, like the ones surrounding this village. The system works because everyone plays their part. Farmers farm, workers build, priests perform rituals, scribes keep records, soldiers defend the borders, and the pharaoh sits at the center, organizing and directing everything. You watch a farmer guide his plow through a field. The wooden blade cuts through the dark soil, turning it over to expose fresh earth. An ox pulls the plow, moving at a steady pace that the farmer matches. Behind them, a woman drops seeds into the furrow and covers them with her foot. This simple action, repeated millions of times across Egypt, produces the food that supports the entire civilization. Without successful harvests, the pyramids could never have been built. Walking along the riverbank, you see boats moving in both directions. Some travel north with the current, carrying goods from Upper Egypt to the delta. Others travel south, their sails filled by the north wind that blows upstream. The Nile serves as Egypt's main highway, connecting the entire country. Messages, goods, and people move along the river much faster than they could travel by land. A group of children play near the water's edge. They wade in the shallows, splashing and laughing. Their parents watch from nearby, alert for crocodiles but allowing the children to enjoy the water. The Nile is both dangerous and essential. It provides food, water, and transportation But it also floods unpredictably and harbors dangerous animals. The Egyptians have learned to respect the river while using its gifts. You think about time and how it works differently here than in other places. In Egypt, time is measured by the Nile's flood cycle. The year divides into 3 seasons based on the river. Akhet, the flood season, when water covers the fields. Pere, the growing season, when crops are planted and tended. Shemu, the harvest season, when grain is collected and stored. This cycle repeats endlessly, providing structure and predictability. The pharaohs are also measured by time, but in a different way. Their reigns mark significant periods, but the system continues regardless of which king sits on the throne. Kings come and go, but the Nile still floods. Crops still grow. Temples still function. The civilization is larger than any individual, even a divine king. This stability is Egypt's greatest strength. You pass a small temple where a priest performs the morning ritual. He opens the shrine where the god statue sits and presents it with food and drink. The ritual happens every day. Performed the same way it has been performed for generations. The priest learned these actions from his predecessor, who learned from his predecessor, creating an unbroken chain reaching back to the temple's founding. Consistency matters in Egyptian religion. The gods expect certain things, and those things must be provided. A funeral procession moves along a path leading toward the desert hills. Mourners follow a sledge carrying a wooden coffin. Professional mourners walk at the front, wailing and throwing dust on their heads. Family members follow, their faces serious and sad. The deceased is being taken to a tomb where the body will be placed along with food, drink, and personal possessions needed in the afterlife. The Egyptians' attitude toward death shapes much of their civilization. They do not see death as an ending, but as a transition to another form of existence. The afterlife is not some distant, unknowable place. It is a continuation of life on earth, requiring the same basic things: food, drink, shelter, and comfort. This is why tombs are filled with supplies, and why tomb walls are decorated with scenes of daily activities. The deceased needs these things to survive in the next world. This belief in the afterlife drives the massive investment in tombs and pyramids. A pharaoh will spend decades of his reign preparing his eternal resting place. He commands thousands of workers, uses vast quantities of materials, and dedicates enormous resources to this single project. To outsiders, this might seem wasteful, but to the Egyptians, it makes perfect sense. The afterlife lasts forever. This life is temporary. It is logical to invest more in the permanent existence than in the temporary one. You climb a hill overlooking the Nile Valley and sit facing east. The sun has climbed high in the sky. The river reflects the light like a silver mirror. Green fields spread on both sides of the water. Villages dot the landscape, their mud brick buildings blending with the earth. In the distance, you can still see the peaks of the pyramids rising from the desert plateau. Egypt works because everything balances. The Nile provides just enough water to support agriculture without causing destructive floods most years. The desert provides protection without completely isolating the country. The climate is predictable enough to allow planning, but variable enough to require attention. The social structure is rigid enough to maintain order, but flexible enough to accommodate change. These balances create stability that allows civilization to flourish. The pharaoh represents the ultimate balance. He is both human and divine. He lives in the palace like a person, but is worshipped like a god. He makes decisions that affect millions of lives, yet he is also bound by traditions and expectations. He must maintain Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of order, truth, and justice. If the pharaoh fails to maintain Ma'at, chaos will result. The Nile will not flood properly. Enemies will invade. Society will collapse. This belief gives the pharaoh enormous power, but also enormous responsibility. You think about the workers you saw at Deir el-Medina. These men spend their entire lives cutting and decorating tombs. They never see the finished product used for its intended purpose because the tombs are sealed after burial. They work in difficult conditions, breathing stone dust and laboring in cramped spaces. Yet they take pride in their work. The quality of their carvings and paintings shows genuine skill and care. They are not just completing a job, they are participating in something sacred, helping to ensure that the deceased can successfully transition to the afterlife. The same dedication shows in the pyramid builders. Moving millions of stone blocks is exhausting, dangerous work, yet the pyramids are built with remarkable precision. Blocks are fitted together carefully. Passages are aligned accurately. Internal chambers are constructed with attention to detail. This level of quality requires more than forced labor. It requires workers who believe in what they are doing, who see their labor as meaningful and important. You watch a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermal currents rising from the heated ground. The bird drifts in wide spirals, barely moving its wings. To the Egyptians, hawks are associated with Horus, the sky god and protector of the pharaoh. Every pharaoh is considered a living embodiment of Horus. When a pharaoh dies, he becomes Osiris, god of the underworld, and his successor becomes the new Horus. This cycle of death and renewal mirrors the agricultural cycle of planting and harvest. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. Shadows lengthen across the fields. Workers start heading home from the fields. Boats tie up at village docks. Cooking fires are lit. The smell of bread baking drifts on the evening breeze. Another day ends in ancient Egypt, much like countless days before and countless days to come. You stand and begin walking back toward the river. Your journey through ancient Egypt is ending. You have seen the great monuments and the small villages. You have watched farmers work their fields and craftsmen create art. You have stood inside pyramids and walked through worker settlements. You have observed the Nile and the desert, the two forces that define this land. What stays with you most is the sense of continuity. Egypt has existed for thousands of years and will continue for thousands more. Pharaohs will come and go. Pyramids will be built and abandoned, but the Nile will keep flowing. Farmers will keep planting. The sun will keep rising and setting. The rhythms that define Egyptian life are deeper than any individual or monument. You also understand now why the pyramids were built. They represent the Egyptian belief that some things can be permanent, that death is not the end, that proper preparation can ensure eternal life. The massive investment in these tombs makes sense when you understand that the Egyptians saw the afterlife as more real and important than earthly existence. The light fades as you reach the river. The water turns from silver to gold to deep blue as the sun sets. Across the river, the desert hills darken. Stars begin to appear in the eastern sky. You find a boat that will take you downstream, back toward the world you came from, back toward your own time. As the boat pushes away from shore, you take one last look at the land of the pharaohs. The pyramids are no longer visible in the growing darkness, but you know they are still there, standing silent watch over the desert. The villages along the riverbank show scattered lights from cooking fires and oil lamps. The sounds of daily life carry across the water. Voices, animal calls, the splash of oars. Ancient Egypt is a civilization built on cooperation and belief. Cooperation between farmers and workers, between priests and kings, between the living and the dead. Belief in the gods, in the afterlife, in the eternal order that holds everything together. These forces created monuments that still stand after thousands of years, testifying to what humans can accomplish when they work together toward a common goal. The boat moves slowly downstream, following the current. The stars multiply overhead until the sky is full of light. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, the celestial Nile where gods and blessed spirits travel. You drift between the riverbanks, carried by water that has flowed this way since before humans built their first settlements, water that will continue flowing long after the last pyramid crumbles to dust. The journey ends, but Egypt continues, eternal as the river that gives it life.